Hi everyone! Today we're talking about the ISTJ personality type, the last type in our 16 personality types explained series. So how about understanding the ISTJ? What are the cognitive functions that describe this type? What are the romantic compatibilities? And what are the strengths and weaknesses of the ISTJ? All about that in the next minutes. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's dive in. So briefly guys, just as we got accustomed to in the previous videos, let's try to understand the 4 letters that describe the ISTJ personality and what they stand for. So initially we have I, which stands for introversion. This means that the ISTJ is more likely to draw their energy from the inside rather than the outside. Then we have S, which stands for sensing. This means that when it comes to perceiving and understanding the world, ISTJs are more likely to prefer focusing on concrete, practical things rather than abstract ideas and theories. Then we have T, which stands for thinking. This means that in their decision-making process, ISTJs are more likely to prioritize rationality, facts, objective, logical aspects in favor of more emotional, subjective things. And lastly, we have J, which stands for judging. This means that ISTJs prefer a more organized framework in which to exist, in which to work in. They work better in a more structured, organized environment that also has deadlines and more clarity in what is expected of them. Right, now let's dive into the cognitive function stack of the ISTJ. Initially, the dominant function of this type is introverted sensing. Remember, we've discussed about this function in videos like ISFJ, ESFJ, ISTJ specifically. Introverted sensing is all about what has worked in the past. The ISTJ is very good at focusing on things that worked in the past, things that they have used in the past, and somehow bringing all of that back into the present moment or into the future. They're more likely to adopt an attitude that is along the lines of, if this is something that worked in the past, why lose my energy and my time right now to try to think of something new and something different? That's why they kind of like prioritizing tradition, things that are more fixed and more rigid as perceived by other people, because it is something that makes sense to them and it is something that kind of brings them comfort. However, this can also lead to them being perceived as inflexible and rigid, something quite similar to what we talked with respect to the ESTJ personality type. Okay, next we have extroverted thinking. This is the auxiliary function of the ISTJ and probably the healthiest function of this type. And as you remember from previous videos, extroverted thinking is all about efficiency. It's all about what works for others. Again, ISTJs are more likely to prioritize facts, logical, objective things in their decision-making process, and they do this with the aid of extroverted thinking. Somehow going from the inside with their practical solutions and trying to apply them to other people in such a way that things work and in such a way that things make sense. That's why they oftentimes strive for efficiency, because especially together with introverted sensing, they like things to be very structured, very neat, very well organized in the most efficient way possible. And this gives them a lot of happiness, and they can also be very good at applying all of this to their friends, to their families, to their romantic partners, and so on. But they need to be careful not to overdo it. Someone asked me on Instagram, how come they're so productive, or are they the most productive type? Well, yeah, they tend to be quite productive because this is something that motivates them and interests them. It makes a lot of sense to them to be productive, and it's one of their main values. So yes, they are probably one of the most productive, efficient types. Tertiary function of the ISTJ is introverted feeling. Remember from INFP or ISFP, introverted feeling is all about drawing your attention to the inside and understanding what your emotions are, what your values are. So when it comes to emotions, ISTJs are more likely to be slightly in tune with how they feel and what their values are, and that's because this is not a dominant or an auxiliary function, so it doesn't come so naturally to them. However, they can still use it, they can still access it to a certain extent. And this might help them make more balanced decisions because they weigh both the logical, objective things that they find with extroverted thinking, but they can also kind of integrate all of this emotional content that introverted feeling brings. This can make them rather sensitive on the inside, but they're not very comfortable expressing it and sharing it with other people because it's something that they're not necessarily in tune with. They don't really like expressing their feelings because extroverted feeling is much lower in their cognitive stack, and this means that they will prefer very deep, intimate connections with very few individuals, and to other people they might seem quite cold and rigid, as I said earlier. And lastly, we have extroverted intuition. This is the inferior function of the ISTJ, and it's probably a function that they will struggle with for a long time in their lives, because it's the function that they have most difficulty accessing. Extroverted intuition is all about creativity, it's all about brainstorming, it's all about connecting disparate ideas. And the ISTJ doesn't really feel very comfortable doing this because it completely opposes introverted sensing. They prefer the tried and tested to the new. However, after a while, they kind of realize that it's also important to try out new things, that it's also important to brainstorm and be creative and explore. And they kind of start being curious about what it might look like for them to use this extroverted intuition. But since it's not something that comes very naturally to them, it might be the case that the ISTJ will kind of overuse extroverted intuition. They will get into the grip of this function, and this will lead to them having very crazy, chaotic behaviors. So instead of following through with the things that they have started, and instead of carrying out their tasks and responsibilities, which is something that they prefer doing most of the time, they will start exploring everything and be like, oh, but I started this project, this is interesting, but how about I try this other project too? And they might have difficulty finishing things exactly because this extroverted intuition distracts them. So it will be a challenge in their lives for them to kind of integrate this function in their psyche and make more balanced perceptions and choices when it comes to the things that they do. Okay, so someone also asked me on Instagram, why do ISTJs seem selfish? Well, it's probably something that some people perceive them to be and some people don't. But if I'm to answer that question from my perspective, it's probably the case that introverted feeling together with an introverted self can make them look more selfish, because they're more focused on providing and helping the few people that are very important in their lives, and to others they may seem cold, aloof and uninterested. And this can get us kind of a perception that they're not very generous. But they can be around people that they really care about. They can be around those that have won their trust and their respect. Okay, lastly, type compatibilities. What other types is the ISTJ compatible with? Well, again, the MBTI theory says that stereotypically, ISTJs will get along best with other types that share sensing as a dominant function. So in this case, it would be ISFJ, ESFP and ESTP. ISTJs tend to get along with these three types because they have this practical, concrete perspective in common. However, they're most similar to their ISFJ counterpart. Additionally, in my perspectives, it's very interesting to observe how types relate to other types that share the same cognitive stack as them. So in this case, it would be ESTJ, ENFP and INFP. And although ENFPs and INFPs might seem very different from them, deep down they share a lot of things and they have a lot of things in common. And NFPs can even find them to be very cute and endearing because of their loyalty and their consistency. However, the ISTJ will probably have most difficulty interacting with, dealing with, having relationships with ENFJs and INFJs due to the complete oppositions of cognitive functions as well as preferred processes of sensing and thinking as compared to intuition and feeling. Of course, this is not to say that they cannot get along, that they cannot have a successful relationship. It might just be a little bit hard for them to interact and communicate and understand each other. And I can say this from my own perspective. It's always been a little bit more difficult to find common ground with ISTJs or ESTJs. However, we do tend to work well together in a professional environment, as I've noticed, because I really like their organized style and their efficiency. However, it might be difficult for these types to interact because even communication becomes very difficult. Someone says something and the other person understands something completely different. So thank you guys, thank you a lot for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you next week with another video.